From the campus of Volunteer State Community College, this is Inside Politics.
Hello, I'm Nancy Hauskins. There's no question that there is history in the making right now, no matter who serves as our 44th President of the United States. And as we wrap up our pre-election coverage here on Inside Politics, we'll talk some presidential politics with our guests today. I am joined by Grady Eades, an Associate Professor of History, and Scott McMillian, an Associate Professor of History and Political Science here at Volunteer State. And first, I want to thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Well, as we said, history is in the making right now. With either candidate, we definitely have a first. Do you think that gender or race is actually going to make a difference when people go in to pull the lever, Mr. Eades?
I actually think that yes. Personally, I tend to think that race is going to matter when we get into the polls. There's something called the Bradley effect that we've seen in previous elections. This goes back to Tom Bradley in an '82 election in California, where the exit polls and everything demonstrated that he had done very well, but when the numbers were actually counted, he didn't win the race. We saw something very similar in the late '90s in Virginia as well. So we know historically that race is going to be a factor when it comes to this particular election.
I think there is some difference though this time, because I think those races were in the past. And I think certainly Harold Ford's race here in Tennessee in 2006, there was not as much of the Bradley effect, because he actually got more of a percentage than polls had him going in. He got 48%. And I think with, certainly with Senator Obama, I think race is a factor, but I think he's broken through that a little bit this year to be where he is right now.
Do you think Senator Obama and Sarah Palin are just extraordinary candidates, or do you think this is the beginning of a shift for minority politicians?
I'd like to believe it's the beginning of a shift. As presidential politics has been dominated by white men for so long, it would be nice to see this as the first step towards something else. I would suggest even beyond Sarah Palin. Hillary Clinton made an exceptionally strong run in the primaries. So I think there's a very good chance that this, on both cases, this will not be the last that we see of either women or African Americans or other minorities making a bid for the White House.
Yes, I think it opens up to where more women, more African Americans, or other minorities actually look at running for elective office now, where I think in the past this was not as much of an option. But I think certainly with Hillary and Sarah Palin this year, and certainly Obama, I think we're going to see more, and that's a great thing.
At this point, personally, I would not be shocked to see either candidate win. The opinion polls seem to be kind of all over the map. Let's talk a little bit about polling. How accurate do you think they are at this point? Kind of a loaded question.
Well, it is a loaded question. Because it was going into last week, we saw that the point spread between Obama and McCain was actually pretty large. And the numbers that I read last night that they did from polling from Friday through Saturday says that the gap has been shrunk to about 5 points between the two. Now, Obama's still in the lead, but it's only about a 5-point gap. And nothing significant has happened in the last several days. So it does make one question how accurate these things are when you can't rationally explain why the poll numbers would change in that way.
Right.
Last week, the New York Times CBS poll that got a lot of attention that had Obama up 14 points, which was a huge lead, and they admitted that they weighted it more to Democratic voters because they are expecting a higher Democratic turnout this year based on the enthusiasm for Obama's candidacy and just higher voter turnout in the Democratic primaries compared to the Republican primaries. Now, we're seeing early voting in states. There is evidence that it is heavily Democratic. And so a poll like that might be more reflective than a traditional Gallup poll or a Zogby or Rasmussen daily tracking poll. I don't know. I think what polls do, I think they do give you a sense of where the race is trending. And presidential elections traditionally do tighten up in the last couple of weeks. I think we're seeing that with Obama going from roughly an aggregate lead of 8 or 9 points to, like, say, the last couple of days, 5 to 6 points. But the key thing for this is not the national tracking polls, but it's the polls in the key swing states. And because ultimately this is about electoral votes, and that's where it appears Obama does have an advantage right now, that the electoral vote projections based on these state swing polls have him almost right at the magic number or above the magic number. And so that's really, the national tracking polls are fun, but it's really these swing state polls that I think really tell us where the race is. And again, even then, are they weighting in a certain way? As like I say, CBS and the New York Times weighted theirs more democratically. Rasmussen weights theirs more Republican. And so Rasmussen has Obama with a national 4-point lead, but they asked more Republicans, so does that mean he's got a 6-point lead?
Right.
And so I think we have to kind of have to watch and kind of look at the averages now. And like I said, I think that 5 to 6 point average is, I think, a good sense of where the race is trending nationally.
Well, this is what brings me back to the Bradley effect, though. I know you said that you don't think it's really in play anymore, but we saw it in play in the primaries, where there were several places where Senator Obama had trended very well in the initial polls and then lost the state in the primaries. So even the state-by-state polls at this stage still scare me if the numbers are only 4 to 6 points, and scare me, I mean, in the sense that I'm not sure that they are really accurate or reliable, because if once you filter in a Bradley effect type situation, 6 points does not, I don't know that that would be enough to overcome the other issues here. So,
can either of you historically remember a time when the polls have been completely inaccurate, completely wrong?
Well, the big one that comes rushing to my mind is the 1948 election with Dewey and Truman. Yeah, the Dewey Wins newspaper is the big one, where the polls were so wildly wrong that the newspapers had printed the alternate headline.
That's a good one.
I think now, though, I think polling is more scientific, and I think it is accurate, and there is a sense that polls don't lie in giving us these snapshot pictures of a race. And I think that, like I said, I do think this one's going to tighten up, but I think you'll see whoever wins this race be within, what we call the margin of error, this 4 to 5 points margin of error this year. I don't expect either candidate, whoever wins, to suddenly blow out and win by 10 points. I don't see that. I think it's going to be relatively close, and so I said I think that the days of the 1948 it would be surprising to just have a complete flip, but it could happen.
Well,
I don't know.
I don't know. Are we really that far away from it? I mean, I think about 2000. I mean, basically the call for Florida in the 2000 election was based off of exit polls, and clearly they were wrong. They called it and they took it back, and then they called it again, and. Of course, what made that interesting as far as how things turned out was they called Florida while the West Coast was still open.
Right.
So then how does, particularly for a state like Florida, in terms of electoral votes, it's one of the big ones, it has a lot of votes there, how does that then affect how people will then vote in California and some of these other places where if you think that other guy is so close, he's basically got it in the bag because Florida falls in this column now, do you even bother anymore? And so, I mean, I would suggest 2000 was another one of those times where the polls actually could have had a pretty significant impact.
And the media certainly took a lot of heat for what happened in 2000 because they're always eager to be first with the information, and I think they've had to certainly back off of making those early predictions.